The night Eden 9 burned, it did not start with screams, it started with silence. The sky above the quiet colony turned darker than normal, and the stars vanished behind a moving shadow. A group of late workers stopped walking and looked up. A child on a balcony pointed at the clouds, because they were not clouds, they were ships. Huge flat shapes hiding the moonlight like a knife covering a candle. In less than 10 seconds the city lights flickered and died. The power grid shut down like someone had poured the heart out of the colony. A low sound rolled across the streets, not loud but deep, like a giant breathing under the ground. People stepped outside their homes, holding small lamps and phones that had no signal. Parents called their children inside without knowing why. Then the first red beam hit the central tower and cut it clean in half. It fell slow, like it did not believe it was dying. The sound came after the fall, and it shook windows like thunder. That was when Eden 9 understood. It was under attack. It was an imperial fleet. The Zarvak Empire had arrived. They were an old species built on cold logic. Their soldiers did not shout and they did not rush. They moved with quiet discipline. Their ships opened hangar doors and released hundreds of drones that dropped into the colony like metal rain. The drones were not made to destroy buildings. They were made to find living bodies and separate them by value. They scanned faces, they scanned blood, they scanned fear. People ran, but the streets were lit only by fire and the red lines of targeting lasers. Some families hid in basements, some climbed into storage tunnels. Some prayed. None of it mattered. The drones found heat, they found breath, they found the small fast heartbeats they wanted. Most children. A Zarvak commander stood inside his flagship watching the colony through a wall screen. He did not smile because his species did not need smiles. His orders were simple. Capture the juvenile specimens intact, destroy any resistance, remove communications, leave the adults alive when possible so they can feel the loss. In a small home near the East Park, a mother held her son close. His name was Eli, and he was 7. He did not understand why the lights were out. The mother whispered that everything would be fine, but her voice shook too much to sound true. The father stood by the door holding a kitchen tool that was not made for war. The door burst inward as if the air itself had kicked at a Zarvak soldier. Stepped into the room, tall and armored, with a smooth mask and bright sensors. The mother placed her body in front of Eli. The father raised his tool and shouted, but the Zarvak soldier fired once the father dropped without a second breath. A drone flew forward and scanned Eli. A cold light swept over the boy. The drone emitted a tone. The Zarvak soldier spoke in a flat translation voice. Juvenile specimen confirmed. The mother begged for mercy. She said he was just a child. She said, take her. Instead, the Zarvak soldier did not even look at her. It grabbed Eli by the upper body. Eli cried and kicked, but the grip was too strong. The mother tried to pull him back, but the soldier pushed her away like she weighed nothing. Eli reached out for her, and his small hand slipped from her fingers. A stuffed toy fell to the floor and rolled onto the table. The last thing Eli saw was his mother on her knees, screaming his name, and the Zarvak soldier walking out through smoke carrying him away. Like cargo in the streets, similar scenes happened again and again. The Zarvak drones marked houses and forced entry. They ignored valuables and machines. They ignored art and food. They only cared about the children, who had the correct biology for their research. Mothers threw themselves at drones. Fathers tried to fight with simple tools. Teenagers tried to guide younger kids into hiding spots. Some succeeded for minutes, some for seconds, but the Zarvak Empire had planned for this. They had sensors that saw through walls. They broke into schools. They broke into shelters. They broke into medical centers and took children even from hospital beds. They left the adults alive, just long enough to understand. The colony defense force tried to respond, but their weapons were small against imperial tech. Their turrets were hacked. Their air defense systems were cut off before they could track anything. When a squad of human soldiers tried to protect a bus full of kids, they were erased. By a single sweep of plasma that burned the ground into glass, the bus did not explode, it just melted and died, and those inside never made a sound. Above the colony, the Zarvak flagship continued to float in perfect control. It was not a battle for them, it was a harvest, and yet not everyone died, not everyone was taken. A human military team had been stationed outside Eden 9 for training. They were far from the city at the moment the ships appeared. Their camp sensors screamed warnings, and then when dead, they lost comms, they lost satellites, they lost every connection to human space. Captain Ryan Cade was the first to see the red beams from the hills. He stood on a ridge and watched fire bloom over the colony his team gathered behind. Him asking what was happening, he had seen combat, but he had never watched a city full of families get cut apart like meat. He ordered his team to stay hidden and move through the forest toward the colony. In silence they ran for hours, using dark paths, avoiding drones that searched the outskirts. When they reached the edge of the city, the streets were already full of debris and broken lights. Captain Cade signaled his team to spread out and look for survivors. They moved through shadows, staying close to walls and broken cars. They saw bodies everywhere, and the children were gone. Each empty arm felt like a wound. Captain Cade entered a small shopping street where flames licked the sides of a toy store. Inside, he found a small toy car crushed under a metal boot, print stained with dark red. He picked it up and felt something inside him change. At that moment his damaged radio crackled to life. It was weak and full of static, but a voice slipped through, a child voice. The words came broken and faint. "Help, please. Help." Captain Cade froze. The voice repeated again, more desperate. "Help, please help." Okay, then it whispered, "One more thing," before disappearing. They took the others, then silence. Captain Cade lowered the radio slowly. His entire team watched his eyes. One soldier whispered that they should retreat and warn the fleet. Captain Cade stared at the burning street and listened to the distant hum of alien machines. He felt fear, but it was pushed aside by something stronger. A human rule, older than law. Do not hurt the children. He looked down at the broken toy car and saw every taken child. He took a deep breath and spoke in a low, steady voice. They touched the kids. His team understood immediately. Their faces changed. Their hands tightened around their weapons. Captain Cade reached into his jacket and pulled out a small military device with emergency codes for extreme situations. He opened the cover and hesitated for 1 second, because once he sent the code, there would be no return. Then he typed the sequence. The screen flashed red. It displayed a single phrase: Omega warning activated. The device fired a burst signal into deep space using hidden relays. Even with Zarvak jamming, it would reach something. The message was simple and deadly to all human forces. No negotiation, no mercy. The children were taken when the message left his hands. Captain Cade felt the air around him change, like the universe had shifted weight. The Zarvak Empire still thought humans were weak. They believed humans would beg. They were wrong. Human kindness was a choice, and it ended the moment they harmed the innocent. Captain Cade looked at his soldiers and pointed toward the city's center where the Zarvak drones were heading. With their captured children, he did not promise survival. He did not promise victory. He only gave purpose. "Find the kids," he said. "Bring them home. And if the Zarvak stand in the way, then burn their empire to the ground above them." The alien ships continued their harvest, unaware that the galaxy had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The Zarvak Empire expected crying messages and weak human prayers. They expected begging. They expected trade. They expected fear. But after Eden 9 went dark, the humans answered with nothing. No broadcast, no angry speech, no surrender, no threats, only silence. The Zarvak commander watched the empty communication channel and felt satisfied. Because silence meant defeat in most species. His officers reported that the juvenile specimens were secured and already being moved to extraction ships. The commander ordered the fleet to hold position and keep the colony surrounded. He wanted the survivors to see the lights in the sky and understand that resistance was pointless. On the ground, the colony was still burning. In the ruins, families searched for each other like shadows. Parents called names until their voices broke. Medical workers dragged wounded people into half-collapsed buildings, trying to stop bleeding using torn cloth and shaking hands, but every time a parent asked where the children were, no one could answer, because the streets were full of empty arms, broken toys, and silent homes. The Zarvak science chief arrived with a data pad in cold excitement. He explained that human juveniles had unique brain patterns and emotional responses perfect for neural mapping and obedience conditioning. He said, humans feel love in a way that can be measured and copied. The commander asked how long the work would take. The science chief said less than 2 cycles if the specimens survived. The commander replied, survival is optional, data is required. Then he turned to his officers and allowed himself one line of pride, humans are emotional. That makes them easy, his officers agreed, and one of them joked that humans would trade entire planets for their young. Another officer said humans will kneel in a day because their hearts are soft. The bridge filled with quiet laughter, cold and ugly like metal mocking grief. They believed the galaxy belonged to the strongest empire, and the Zarvak Empire had never been punished for cruelty before in their history. They had crushed dozens of species, and the pattern was always the same. The victims cried first. Then they negotiated, then they surrendered, then they vanished. The commander believed humans would follow the same pattern because humans built homes and schools and parks, and that meant humans feared loss. But he did not understand something important. Human fear can turn into human fury, and fury turns into action. Meanwhile, in deep space, the Omega signal raced through hidden human relays and reached a classified command network that only responded to extinction-level threats. In a silent human war room far beyond Eden 9, a duty officer saw the code and went pale. He did not shout, he did not panic, he simply stood up and pressed an emergency switch that opened systems sealed for generations. A red light spread across command screens like blood on water. The officer read the message again and whispered the words, no negotiation, no mercy. The children were taken in that moment. Every human protocol changed. The room filled with morose and hardened officers who did not ask for proof, because the Omega code was never used for lies. One admiral, older than most of the ships, spoke with a calm voice like reading a funeral prayer. Activate Iron Mercy, wake the carriers, open the vaults. Another officer asked if they should send a warning to the Zarvak. The admiral turned slowly and answered, humans do not negotiate for stolen children. We recover them and we punish the thieves. That was the moment the human response became something more than revenge. It became law. Orders launched across human space like thunder fleets that were in training turned toward battle fleets guarding trade lanes, changed course. Fleets in repair were pushed into launch status with unfinished paint and open panels because time no longer mattered. Shipyards worked like living machines. Workers did not sleep. They did not eat. They tightened bolts, loaded ammunition, and watched the war feed in silence. In one dock, a young engineer asked why everyone looked dead inside. An older worker answered without looking up, because the enemy took our kids and the Universal learned what that costs. In another station, a mother who worked as a weapons loader kept wiping her eyes while lifting crates. She did not stop, she did not speak, she just kept loading because she imagined her own child somewhere in the dark. On a far mining moon, a group of civilian pilots volunteered their ships for evacuation missions, even though nobody asked them yet. They just knew this was coming across human worlds. People stopped arguing about politics and borders and money because none of it mattered now. Only one sentence mattered. They took the children. In another sector, a human intelligence ship intercepted Zarvak internal chatter. The aliens laughed and called humans pets, chained by emotions. They joked that humans would crawl to the Empire and beg. They called human love a leash. The humans listening did not reply. They recorded every word and forwarded it to command as evidence to show the galaxy later when questions would come, and there would be questions because what humans were about to do would shake history. At Eden 9, Captain Ryan Cade and his team moved like hunters through smoke. They avoided patrolled drones and searched for the child's signal. but the radio stayed broken and weak. The city was a graveyard of heat and fire. Cade saw a playground melted into black metal. He saw a small bicycle lying on its side with one wheel still spinning like it refused to accept the end. Then he found a dying defense officer pinned under rubble. The officer grabbed Cade by the sleeve and whispered, "The aliens are taking them to the sky." Cade asked where. The officer lifted a shaking hand toward the North Industrial District, and then his eyes faded. Cade stood still for one breath and his face turned colder. His squad felt it too. The humans were no longer surviving. They were starting a rescue. The Zarvak extraction zone near the industrial district was guarded by heavy drones and armored soldiers. A line of captured adults was forced to kneel as a distraction while cargo lifts carried sealed pods upward. The pods were filled with children, sedated and stacked in rows. Like cargo, Cade watched from behind a broken wall and saw a small shoe fall from a pod hatch and bounce on the ground. The shoe was tiny and blue, and it landed in ash like a dead flower. Cade looked away for 1 second to breathe, because if he stared too long he would lose control. Then he gave a signal and his team prepared explosives. Their mission was impossible, but impossible was not a word humans respected when children were involved. The first explosion tore through a drone tower, and the Zarvak guards turned in shock. They had not expected humans to attack after being broken. They had not expected humans to get close, but Cade and his soldiers rushed forward like a blade in the dark. They did not scream. They did not waste bullets. They moved with cold purpose, taking down guards and cutting cables to stop the lifts. One soldier reached the control panel and jammed it so the pods could not rise further. Another soldier climbed a damaged platform and fired into the sky at the hovering transport craft, not to destroy it but to force it higher away from the pods. Another soldier dragged a wounded parent away from crossfire, even while shooting, because humans still protected each other even in fury. The battle became chaotic fire against iron. The Zarvak soldiers were stronger, but the humans were faster and smarter and more desperate. A human does not fight the same when fighting for territory. A human fights different when fighting for a child. The Zarvak commander on the flagship received the alert and laughed at first, thinking it was only desperate survivors. Then a sensor report arrived, showing organized human movement, tactical precision, and calm coordination. His laughter stopped. He ordered reinforcements to the ground and demanded a status report on juvenile transport. A frightened officer reported humans had disabled multiple lifts, and at least 3 extraction pods were stuck below launch height. The commander stared at the screen, feeling something unfamiliar, irritation and a thin edge of worry, because it did not feel like chaos. It felt like planning. Then another report came in. A human signal had been detected leaving the planet. The officer said it was short and encrypted. The commander asked what it meant. The officer replied, "Unknown, but it used high-priority human patterns." The commander tried to act confident and said humans are weak, humans will break, but his voice had less power now because he had finally seen something that did not fit his empire logic. He had seen humans fight without hope and without fear in the human command network. A carrier group entered warp with a formation so large it bent sensor space nearby. Neutral observers saw the movement and began to panic because no one had seen humans mobilized like this in recorded history. A neutral diplomat sent a message asking what was happening. Human command responded with only one sentence: "Stay out of the way." Even that simple reply carried weight, like a warning to the entire galaxy in the Zarvak Empire. That same silence now felt different. It was no longer weakness. It was the sound of a species closing its fist. And on Eden 9, Captain Ryan Cade looked up at the extraction ships hovering above the smoke and whispered a promise that was not for the enemy, but for the children. "We are coming, and we will not stop until you are gone." After the first rescue strike, the Zarvak Empire finally understood one thing: the humans were not broken. The colony was destroyed, but the spirit behind it had become sharper. Captain Ryan Cade and his squad pulled back into the ruins with smoke. Covering their retreat, they had managed to stop several extraction pods, but they could not open them yet because Zarvak locks were coated with Imperial bio-keys. Cade watched the sealed pods lying on the ground like giant metal coffins, and he felt his chest tighten because inside those pods children were sleeping, not knowing where they were. Some of them would wake up alone, some would cry in silence. Some would never wake at all if the aliens decided to cut their losses. Cade placed his hand on the cold metal and whispered, "Hold on just a little longer." His squad formed a defensive circle around the pods while drones searched above them like hungry birds. The Zarvak commander on the flagship ordered full ground purge to eliminate the human resistance. He did not care about adult survivors anymore. He only cared about controlling the situation and completing transport. Reinforcement ships descended and heavy soldiers marched through burning streets with better armor and bigger weapons. Their boots crushed toys and broken glass. Without emotion, their scanners hunted human body heat and their drones mapped every ruin. Meanwhile, on the flagship, the Zarvak science chief complained about delays. He said some specimens were at risk because emotional stress damages the neural data. The commander answered coldly, "Then remove their emotions if needed." The science chief smiled because that was what he wanted to do anyway on a medical deck deep inside the extraction ship. The first group of children were already being prepared for the lab. They were strapped to clean metal beds under bright white lights. Human kids had never seen such cold rooms. They had never smelled chemical air like that. They had never heard alien voices speaking like machines. The Zarvak doctors did not hit them, and they did not shout because they believed fear was a tool, not an accident. They used gentle tones and false comfort while needles moved into small arms. One child asked where her mother was, and a Zarvak assistant replied, "Your parent is irrelevant. You belong to the Empire now." The child started crying, and the assistant noted it as a reaction sample. Meanwhile, far from Eden 9, the human fleets moved like a silent storm, but the humans did not rush in blind. They prepared with something more dangerous than speed. They prepared with unity. On a high-security human station called Meridian Black, the council gathered with admirals and intelligence chiefs. The room was quiet like a tomb because everyone had seen the reports. They had watched footage from Eden 9. They had listened to recorded screams. They had seen the toy stores, the playgrounds, the empty schools. Then the room watched the intercepted chatter where the aliens laughed about human weakness. Nobody in the room spoke for a long time until the oldest admiral stood up. He placed a small photograph on the table. It was a picture of his granddaughter smiling in a school uniform. He said, "One sentence. If it was her, there would be no planet left to negotiate with the council." Chairman asked what the human response would be, and the admiral answered, "We do not answer with words, we answer with action." Then the chairman opened a sealed file that only had one line of text, "Project Iron Mercy." The room stiffened because everyone knew the name. It was not just a military plan, it was a rule built after an ancient tragedy long before this era. It was a protocol designed for one type of crimes against human children. The plan was simple and brutal. Locate every Zarvak lab, destroy every Zarvak fleet, remove the Empire ability to threaten anyone. Again, no treaties until the children are returned, no peace while one child remains. Missing, the chairman looked around the table and said, "The galaxy will call us monsters after this." The admiral replied, "Let them, because monsters are what we need tonight." A younger officer asked if there was any chance the Zarvak would surrender. The children, if threatened, the intelligence chief responded, "They will not surrender because they believe they are superior and because they think humans still follow rules." The room went silent again. Then the admiral said, "Humans do follow rules. We follow our own, and the most important rule is this: you do not touch our children." In human space, the announcement was not public, but it was felt everywhere. Defense systems activated. Security fleets took positions. Civilian ships were cleared. From lanes medical stations prepared for wounded soldiers, industry shifted into full war mode. Even people who hated the military worked together. Because this was no longer politics, it was survival of family workers and factories carved small. Words into armor plates before shipment for the kids. Pilots painted tiny symbols on fighters, a simple handprint meaning protect. The human response was emotional, yes, but it was disciplined emotion, sharpened into steel. Meanwhile, Captain Cade kept fighting on Eden 9, but now the battle was changing. Zarvak reinforcements arrived and pushed hard, trying to reclaim the pods. A heavy drone squad surrounded Cade's position and began cutting through rubble with plasma torches. Cade knew they would be overrun soon if help did not arrive. He ordered his squad to move the pods into an underground freight tunnel system below the industrial district. It was narrow and dark, but it could hide them from air scans. The soldiers used cables and human strength to drag the pods through broken streets while enemy fire cracked the walls around them. One pod shook slightly and a small voice came through the metal. "Please, where am I?" The voice was weak but real. Cade stopped and answered through the pod door. "You are safe, kid. We are with you." That simple sentence gave his team more power than any weapon. Because now it was not an idea inside the pods, there were living children listening. The Zarvak ground leader tracked the movement and ordered a strike team to follow them into the tunnels. He wanted the pods back, at any cost. The tunnel battle became a nightmare of shadows. Human soldiers used flash grenades and close-range tactics, because long-range weapons were useless in tight spaces. Zarvak soldiers were strong, but their armor made them slow, and humans used that. Humans set traps using collapsed beams and explosive charges. They fought with knives and short rifles. They fought without fear because behind them were the children. The Zarvak realized something terrifying in those tunnels. Humans will die to protect their young, and not one human will stop the other humans from doing it. On the flagship, the Zarvak commander received reports of tunnel resistance and demanded immediate orbital purge. He wanted 2 glass sections of the colony to destroy the humans and recover what was left. But the science chief warned that orbital fire might destroy the juvenile specimens. The commander hesitated for the first time because he could not decide between pride and profit. That hesitation was the first crack in the Zarvak Empire arrogance, and that crack was enough for fate to enter. In deep space, the first human carrier group exited warp at the edge of Eden 9 system. It was massive and silent, and it did not broadcast threats. It did not demand surrender. It simply arrived like judgment. The Zarvak sensor screamed alarms as new contacts appeared, not dozens but hundreds. The Zarvak commander stared at the screen and felt his stomach tighten, because what he saw was not a normal fleet. It was a human execution formation on the human flagship. The admiral looked at the planet below and spoke softly as if speaking to the missing children. "Hold on, we are here." Then he turned to his bridge crew and gave the command that marked the beginning of the end. "Begin retrieval. Phase 1, disable their ships. Phase 2, take our children back. Phase 3, erase the Empire." And above Eden 9, the first human guns charged, their lights bright as sunrise. While the Zarvak finally understood the truth, human silence was never surrender. It was the moment before the storm. The human fleet did not arrive like an army. It arrived like a verdict. Hundreds of ships slid out of warp in perfect formation, so quiet the Zarvak scanners almost refused to believe it. The first thing the Zarvak commander noticed was the spacing. Human vessels kept exact distance like teeth of a blade. The second thing he noticed was the lack of communication. No threats, no demands, no propaganda, just cold movement. The Zarvak commander ordered an imperial broadcast, demanding the humans stand down and accept negotiation terms. The message went out in multiple languages offering trade and prisoner exchange. The humans did not answer. The Zarvak commander tried again and promised mercy. If humans surrendered, the humans still did not answer. That silence hit harder than any insult because it felt like the humans were not speaking to an equal. It felt like they were not speaking at all. It felt like the Zarvak Empire had already been judged and found guilty on the human flagship admiral. Halden Voss stood on the bridge staring at Eden 9 on the screen. The planet below looked wounded. A glowing scar of fire cut across the colony lights and smoke wrapped the surface like a dying breath. A young officer beside him asked if they should open with warnings and give the Zarvak a chance to return the children. Voss did not look away from the planet. He said they already made their choice. Then he raised his hand and issued the first true command of the war target their control ships. Not their fighters cut the head first, no mercy, but no waste. The human fleet moved instantly, like a single creature, smaller. Strike craft launched from carriers in waves and spread through space like dark birds. The Zarvak Navy finally reacted and began forming defense lines. Their warships turned to face the humans and opened weapon ports confident in their superior technology. The Zarvak had fought many species before and always won with the same method: shock and overwhelming firepower. But when their cannons charged, they discovered something wrong. Their targeting systems glitched, their energy locks failed, their missiles drifted off course like they were blind. Zarvak officer shouted that human jamming was blocking everything. The commander demanded visual confirmation, and the view screen showed it. Human ships had released thousands of tiny drones so small they were almost invisible. These drones did not explode. They attached to Zarvak hulls like parasites and began cutting signal lines, corrupting sensors, and frying communication arrays. The Zarvak had never faced this kind of warfare because most species fought like cowards from distance. Humans fought like predators up close. The first human salvo was not a blast of energy. It was a precision electromagnetic strike that hit 3 Zarvak command vessels and shut them down completely. Their lights died and their engines froze. The ships drifted like dead whales in space. Zarvak fighters tried to rush, but human interceptors cut them apart with clean bursts and sharp turns. The humans moved with discipline like they had rehearsed this moment for centuries, because they had a hidden place in human history. There was always a plan for the day someone crossed the child line below in Eden 9. The battle in the tunnels continued. Captain Ryan Cade was exhausted, covered in ash and blood, but his hands were steady. He and his squad had protected the extraction pods through multiple attacks. One soldier was injured and could barely stand, but still refused to step away from the pods because he could hear children crying inside, and it kept him moving. The Zarvak strike team pushed into the tunnels with heavy armor and cutting torches. Trying to breach the pod locks, the humans used everything they had: mines, flash charges, broken pipes filled with fuel, even bare hands when ammunition ran low. The tunnel walls shook as explosions echoed through the underground like angry thunder. A Zarvak soldier finally reached one pod and began slicing the metal doors slowly, the plasma blade glowing bright. The child inside screamed and begged, and the sound hit every human in the tunnel. Like a knife, Captain Cade charged forward and slammed into the alien with full force. He was smaller and weaker by alien standards, but his rage made him heavy. He stabbed into a joint gap in the armor again and again until the Zarvak fell. The alien tried to lift its weapon, but Cade did not stop. He whispered through clenched teeth, "That is not your child," and then he ended it quickly. Behind him, one of his soldiers shouted that something was happening above ground. The tunnel ceiling vibrated and dust rained down like sand. Cade looked at his wrist scanner and saw it. New signals, human signals, hundreds. The rescue was here. The humans in the tunnel did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They simply breathed like drowning people. Finally reaching air above the planet, the human fleet began the second phase. They did not destroy Eden 9 airspace with random fire, they carved it with precision. They targeted Zarvak shuttle hangars, fuel docks, and extraction ship clamps. The goal was clear: stop the escape routes. The Zarvak had pods full of children in orbit and also children already loaded onto lab ships. The humans could not risk uncontrolled blasts. They used controlled kinetic strikes and boarding operations. Marines launched in armored pods that punched into Zarvak hulls and cut open corridors like cans. Once inside, they fought in silence without shouting because noise meant fear and humans were not afraid. They moved room to room with thermal scanners and biofilters searching for human life signs first and alien targets second. Their orders were simple: recover any child alive, leave nothing that can be used to repeat this crime. In one Zarvak transport ship, a human marine team found a medical deck filled with children strapped to metal beds. Some were asleep. Some were crying, some were too shocked to speak. The Marines froze for 1 second, because even trained soldiers can break when seeing that kind of evil. Then, their leader, a woman named Sergeant Mira Lane, whispered, "Not one more child stays here." She ordered her team to secure the kids first. They cut straps gently, covered children with thermal blankets, and carried them like treasure. One small boy grabbed her glove with weak fingers and asked if he was going home. Lane swallowed hard and answered, "Yes, kid, you are going home then." She stood up and her eyes became cold. She looked at the Zarvak doctors shaking in the corner, begging for mercy, and she said, "You chose this," and gave the order to lock them in the room until extraction was complete. On the Zarvak flagship, the commander watched disaster unfold across every screen. His ships were failing, his control nodes were dead, his escorts were being boarded. His officers shouted for instructions, but each second made it worse, because human tactics attack the Empire brain, not its muscles. The commander finally screamed to activate the planetary purge and destroy the ground resistance, even if it meant sacrificing specimens. But before he could complete the order, his flagship shook as a human strike cruiser slammed into its side with a boarding hook and locked on like a predator biting prey. Alarms blared across the Zarvak bridge. Lights flashed. The commander tried to regain control, but a human voice finally broke the silence across open channel, a calm, deep voice that carried no emotion at all. "This is Admiral Voss. You will power down your weapons and release all child prisoners. If you refuse, your species will not survive the hour." The Zarvak commander shouted back that the Empire would never kneel and that humans were too small to challenge them. Voss replied, "Humans are small until you hurt our children. Then we become the end of empires." The channel cut. The commander felt something new for the first time in his life. Fear, not fear of death, but fear of extinction, because he could feel it now. The humans were not fighting to win territory, they were fighting to erase a threat, and there is no defense against a species that has decided you should not exist on Eton 9. Captain Cade received the human fleet signal and guided his squad toward the surface through broken stairways and collapsed service tunnels. When they reached open air, they saw the sky filled with streaks of light human dropships descending Zarvak, craft burning, human fighters chasing enemy shuttles away from the atmosphere. The air smelled like smoke and hot metal, but for the first time there was something else in it: hope. Cade looked at the extraction pod still in the tunnel entrance, and then looked at his men and said, "Hold this position until retrieval arrives." He stepped outside and raised a flare signal toward the sky. The flare burned bright blue, the human rescue color. Seconds later, a human dropship roared overhead and answered with a green confirmation light. Cade closed his eyes for one moment and let himself feel it. The children were not forgotten. Then he opened his eyes and watched the burning Zarvak ships falling like dying stars, and he knew the war had changed. The Zarvak came to take human children, but now the humans had come to take everything else. The Zarvak Empire began to collapse in layers, first the outer defense, then the fleet, then the pride. The humans did not rush like angry animals, they moved like surgeons cutting a poison out of the galaxy. Admiral Holden Voss watched the battlefield with calm eyes and gave short orders: disable engines, board the lab ships, secure the children, destroy the research data, leave no trace. Their goal was not simple victory, it was protection, and protection demanded certainty. The Zarvak's commander on his flagship tried to gather remaining ships into one final defensive wall, but every minute more vessels went dark. Human drones chewed through communication arrays like insects, human jammers made Zarvak targeting blind human interceptors hunted enemy fighters until the space around Eden 9 looked like a graveyard of glowing wreckage. Still, the most dangerous part was not the fleet, it was the labs. Because somewhere among those Zarvak ships were the missing children, some alive, some injured. Some trapped inside metal rooms that did not know kindness. Human command repeated one rule across every channel. No heavy explosives, near life pods, no random fire, confirm human biosigns before final strikes. That rule slowed the humans down, but it also made them unstoppable because it showed discipline, not rage, and discipline turns fury into victory. Captain Ryan. Cade stood at the tunnel mouth watching human marines rush in with equipment and cutting tools they wore heavy armor with. Human symbols and child handprints painted on shoulders they did not ask. Cade who he was, they already knew, because Eden 9 survivors were family now. A Marine officer clasped Cade's arm and said, "Good hold, Captain." "We have them from here," Cade nodded, and stepped back as the Marines began opening the first extraction pod. Their cutters hissed, and a thick lock plate fell away. The pod door opened with a slow, heavy groan, and warm air rushed out like a trapped breath inside. Children blinked in. Bright light, confused and afraid, a small girl tried to crawl backward until a human medic gently raised her hands and said, "It is okay, you are safe." The girl stared at the medic, eyes full of fear, then she saw the human flag patch and started crying. Not from pain, but from relief. Another boy looked around and whispered, "Are they gone?" The medic answered, "Yes, they are gone, and we are here now." Cade watched the children step out one by one and felt something break inside him and heal at the same. Tommy's hands shook, and he hated that they shook, but he did not hide it because this moment deserved honesty. Some kids hugged strangers, some kids could not speak. Some just stood frozen, holding each other like they were afraid the air itself would steal them again. Then Cade saw one child clutching a torn teddy bear, and he remembered the toy store, and the crushed car, and the empty arms in the streets. He turned away for a second and wiped his face. Before anyone noticed, above them the war continued and the humans moved into the true heart of the Zarvak crime. The largest lab ship was called Vessel 12, a floating research fortress guarded by thick armor and elite soldiers. Zarvak scientists believed it was untouchable because its hull was layered with shielding and its decks were filled with hostages, but the humans did not care what it was called. They called it the Cage. A boarding team of human marines led by Sergeant Myra Lane slammed into Vessel 12 using kinetic breach pods that punched through hull plating and locked like hooks. The breach doors blew open and the marines poured inside in a perfect stack formation, their weapons ready, their voices low. They met Zarvak guards in the first corridor, and the fight was brutal, close and fast. Plasma bolts, scorched walls, and human rounds. Shattered armor joints, snapped blood, floated in weightless beads. The Marines did not chase fleeing enemies. They advanced toward one destination, the biolab zones. Every meter of corridor was paid for in sweat and pain, but humans kept moving because the children were ahead. In the center lab deck, the Zarvak science chief stood behind glass watching the security feeds. He saw humans advancing, and he did something he believed would save him. He ordered the release of a chemical sleep gas into one wing where children were stored. His plan was to kill the specimens if needed rather than allow humans to take them back, because to him data mattered more than life. But his order never reached the systems because a human drone had already infected his network. The gas vents failed and instead triggered emergency fire suppression, sealing the wing. The science chief stared in confusion as his control vanished. A Zarvak assistant whispered, "Sir, the humans are inside," the chief replied. "Then erase the files, wipe the memory cores, destroy the sample vaults." He began smashing controls with his claws, trying to purge everything, but he was too late because humans did not only come with guns, they came with hackers and field engineers and counter-intel teams who had studied Zarvak tech like hunters studying a beast. The human engineers slammed portable drives into alien ports and ripped data out faster than Zarvak systems could delete it. That humans were taking evidence, not just children. Because punishment without proof can be questioned, but punishment with proof becomes history. The lab doors finally exploded inward and Sergeant Lane stepped through. With her team, she saw the science chief in the rows of cages behind him holding children in medical restraints. Some children stared with empty eyes, some were shaking, some were whispering prayers. They barely understood. Lane walked forward slowly. Because anger can make mistakes and mistakes can kill kids. Her voice was steady like stone. All children now. The science chief tried to speak and offered negotiation. He claimed he could return them in exchange for safe passage. Lane did not answer. With words, she simply raised a small beacon and activated it. The beacon sent a code through the ship and every human marine heard it. Child biosigns confirmed the entire ship became a rescue zone. The marines moved at once, cutting locks, breaking restraints, lifting children into arms, wrapping them in blankets, and carrying them out. Some children panicked at first because they feared another trick, but as soon as they felt human hands and heard human voices, their fears shifted into crying. One small boy grabbed Lane's armored plate and whispered, "I thought nobody would come." Lane looked at him and said, "Humans always come for their children." Then her face hardened again, and she turned back to the lab. The science chief backed away and tried to run, but two Marines blocked him. He shouted that the Zarvak Empire would avenge him. Lane stepped close until her helmet faceplate reflected his mask. She said, "The only thing the Zarvak Empire will do now is disappear." She ordered the chief restrained and dragged to a holding cell, not out of mercy, but because he would be a witness. The galaxy would hear what he did and what it cost. In orbit, Admiral Voss received confirmation that major child groups were being recovered, but some still remained missing. Intelligence estimated that another transport had fled toward the outer system carrying high-value specimens. Voss gave an order that froze every neutral observer ship to 07. Pursue the fleeing transport. Full interdiction, no escape. He then issued another order to all ships: begin dismantlement protocol. That meant every Zarvak war vessel disabled would be stripped of weapons systems and then destroyed. Every research lab would be wiped, every data vault would be burned, every breeding facility would be collapsed so the Empire could not rebuild quickly. Voss knew some would call it genocide, but he did not see it that way. He saw it as removing a disease that had proven it could not be trusted in one captured Zarvak ship. A group of alien prisoners begged human Marines to spare their families on the homeworld. A Marine officer answered with calm cruelty, "You should have protected our families first." Then he turned away, not because he enjoyed the suffering, but because he could no longer feel sorry for a species that had chosen children as targets on Eden 9. The rescued kids were moved into human medical tents and carried into evacuation dropships. Doctors treated burns and bruises and needle marks. Some kids were too weak to walk. Some had chemical scars on their skin. Some kept asking for their parents, and that question stabbed deeper than any weapon, because for many of those parents there would be no answer. Yet even in grief, the humans kept their promise. Every child found would go home alive if the human body could still move and breathe. Captain Cade sat beside a small girl who refused to let go of his hand. She was not Eli, but she could have been. She asked if the bad monsters were gone. Cade swallowed hard and said, "They are going away forever." The girl nodded slowly as if trying to believe it. Then she leaned against him and fell asleep from exhaustion. Cade stared into the sky where Zarvak ships burned and felt a cold certainty spread through his bones. The war was no longer about Eden 9. It was about the message the galaxy would never forget, a message written in fire and discipline and blood. If you hurt human children, you do not face a battle, you face the end. The Zarvak Empire did not understand what was happening until it was too late. They still believed war had rules, they still believed empires could bargain, and they still believed humans would stop once the children were returned, but humans did not stop because the crime was not only theft, it was proof that the Zarvak would do it again to any world that could not fight back. Admiral Halden Voss watched the updated rescue reports and felt a thin relief inside his chest. Most of the children had been recovered from Eden 9 and the lab ships, but not all. Some were still missing, and that meant the mission was not complete. Human fleets do not leave a battlefield. While children are unaccounted for in human command, one number mattered. More than any victory report, how many children are still not home. Every time the number was not 0, the war remained unfinished. The human carrier group spread through the system in a widening net. Interdictors locked down warp paths and created gravity traps to stop Zarvak ships from escaping. Human intelligence vessels listened to every whisper in the enemy network and followed faint signals like blood trails to the last hiding places. The Zarvak attempted to flee. They sent fast transports toward the outer belt. They launched decoy ships full of empty pods to distract pursuit. They even tried to broadcast fake surrender codes. But human commanders were not chasing glory, they were chasing children. Their scanners were tuned to human biosigns, and their boarding teams were trained to detect false cargo. The chase became a silent hunt in one sector. A Zarvak transport tried to outrun a human destroyer by jumping toward a nearby moonfield. The transport believed humans would not follow into such dangerous debris, but the human destroyer followed without hesitation, weaving through rocks like a knife through rain. It fired a disabling shot that sliced the transport engines with clean precision. The Zarvak ship spun helplessly, and human marines boarded within minutes. Inside, they found 12 children locked in a dark storage bay, sedated and stacked in restraints. Like merchandise, the Marines carried them out with careful hands and soft voices while Zarvak crew begged for mercy. The human team leader did not execute the crew in anger. He simply locked them down and transmitted their identities to command. Because the humans were building something larger than revenge, they were building a trial for history, and history needed names. While the rescue net expanded, another order moved through the fleet. Begin planetary pressure. That order made even veteran officers quiet, because it meant the war had moved from rescue to consequence. Zarvak homeworld coordinates were pulled from encrypted archives and old spy maps. It was a planet called Zarvan Prime. It's a world of black towers and wide military rings and shipyards that never slept. It was the heart of the Empire, the place where the decision to take children had been approved, the place where the science chief had been celebrated for cruelty, the place where the Zarvak believed no enemy could reach them. Human fleets jumped toward Zarvan Prime in waves. Each arrival brought more power, more ships, more dread. The galaxy watched in fear. Neutral worlds sent desperate messages asking humans to accept peace and stop escalation. Human command answered with the same cold sentence again: stay out of the way. Many alien leaders finally understood that humans were not expanding territory, they were removing danger, like a farmer burning a field infected with poison. They did not hate all aliens. They hated the line that had been crossed when the human armada reached Zarvan Prime. It arrived outside the defensive rings and held position. The Zarvak defense fleet launched to face them. Thousands of warships formed a shield around the planet, and the Zarvak High Council broadcast a message to the galaxy, saying the human invasion was barbaric and illegal. They claimed the children were being returned and the issue should be closed. They begged neutral worlds for support. Some even accused humans of genocide. In the human flagship, Admiral Voss listened to the message and did not react. He only asked one question: are all children confirmed? Recovered, the officer answered. Not yet, we still have missing groups, likely on the surface labs. Voss nodded once and issued a single command. Begin, Operation Doorbreak. The human fleet surged forward, not as chaos but as a machine. The first strikes targeted defense satellites and shipyard power relays. Human hackers infected control grids, causing Zarvak weapons to turn off or misfire. Human drones attached to ring stations and disabled them from inside. The defensive shield cracked within hours. Zarvak fighters rushed in waves, but human interceptors cut them down with ruthless efficiency. The humans did not fight like a species trying to prove strength. They fought like a species trying to finish a job. The Zarvak defense fleet began to collapse, and when it did, the human fleet did not immediately bombard the planet. That restraint confused the Zarvak, because they expected humans to destroy everything if they truly wanted revenge. Instead, Human Command opened a broadcast channel and delivered one message to Zarvan Prime: release every child prisoner, reveal every lab location, surrender all research staff. You have 1 hour to comply. The Zarvak Council refused because pride was their religion. They believed giving in would break the Empire forever. They ordered the remaining fleets to fight until the last ship and commanded ground forces to hide the children deep under the capital and secure vault labs there. Plan was to use the children as leverage again, but humans do not negotiate twice for the same crime. When the deadline ended, Admiral Voss ordered Phase 2. Precision descent. Human drop fleets entered atmosphere like falling stars and struck key locations across Zarvan Prime: shipyards, weapon factories, research towers, and command centers. They used targeted kinetic rounds to disable infrastructure without turning cities into ash. The goal was not random killing, the goal was cutting off the Empire ability to resist while hunting down the last labs. Marines stormed underground facilities with maps built from stolen Zarvak files. They fought through metal corridors past alien soldiers who defended doors with desperate fear, because even Zarvak warriors now realized they were not fighting for victory, they were fighting for survival. In one underground lab, a human team found a chamber filled with children in cryopods waiting for transfer. The children were pale and quiet and still alive. The team leader placed a hand on the pod glass and whispered, "Thank God." Then she turned to her squad and said, "Get them out now." Every pod removed felt like pulling a thorn out of humanity. The final missing children list slowly decreased, until at last the signal came through. All child biosigns secured, all children accounted for. The moment that confirmation reached Admiral Voss, the war became something else. He looked around the bridge and spoke softly. "We came for them, we got them. Now we make sure this never happens again." He issued the final order: dismantle the Empire, no surrender accepted for leadership. No reconstruction allowed for military industry. Strip the rings, burn the shipyards, destroy the labs, every Zarvak weapon Blackbourne was targeted, every research tower was erased, every fleet dock became a graveyard. The Zarvak Council tried to broadcast surrender, but human jamming swallowed their words like the universe itself refused to listen. Zarvak soldiers began to drop weapons and run because they finally understood the truth. There was no deal left to make, there was no mercy left to request. Not because humans loved cruelty, but because humans loved children, and love that becomes unforgiving when betrayed. The galaxy watched the fall of Zarvan Prime with horror and silence, because it was not just a defeat, it was a warning carved into the stars. Human fleets did not occupy the planet, they did not claim its cities, they did not plant flags. They simply removed the Empire ability to rise again, and then left behind a single transmission that every species would record forever. This is the human line: harm our children, and you lose your future. When the human fleets finally turned away from Zarvan Prime, they carried the rescued children home. They carried evidence for the galaxy. They carried scars that would never heal fully. And behind them, the Zarvak Empire burned, not as revenge, but as consequence, because in the universe there are many laws, but only one rule that humanity enforces without hesitation: you do not touch human children. When the last Zarvak weapons went silent, the galaxy expected humans to celebrate. But humans did not celebrate, because the war was never about victory. It was about taking the children back and making sure nobody ever tried again. The human fleets returned through space, like tired guardians, carrying something more precious than trophies. They carried small bodies wrapped in blankets. They carried children who had nightmares and bruises and needle marks. They carried children who still asked for their parents and weak voices. Some parents were alive, waiting at hospitals and spaceports, shaking with hope. Others were gone forever, and that loss followed every ship like a shadow. Admiral Halden Voss stood on his bridge watching the stars. Passon felt no pride, only responsibility, because the hardest part was not destroying the Zarvak Empire. The hardest part was helping the children feel safe again on the medical carrier Mercy Dawn. The rescued kids were placed in warm rooms with soft lights and real food. Human doctors spoke gently and used simple words, because fear breaks easily, but healing takes time. Psych officers sat beside kids for hours, just listening. One boy refused to sleep unless someone held his hand. A Marine stayed beside him all night without moving. Another girl kept whispering the same sentence. They said you would not come. A nurse answered every time. Humans always come for their children. Every child heard that sentence, until it became a shield. Inside their heart, across human worlds, families waited in lines at reunion centers. Some parents collapsed when they saw their children alive. Others broke down when the lists ended and their child name was not there. Human officials did not hide the truth. They told people exactly what happened. They showed evidence, and they showed names. They honored the dead and they honored the survivors. The story of Eden 9 became known not as a battle, but as a wound that the whole species carried together. Captain Reinecade returned with his squad weeks later. His body healed, but his eyes were different. He attended a small ceremony where rescued kids were given medals, not as soldiers but as survivors. One child walked up to him holding a torn teddy. Baron said, "Thank you for coming." Cade knelt and answered, "I promised, and humans keep promises." The child hugged him, and Cade held back tears because he understood now that strength was not in weapons. Strength was in protecting someone small who did not protect themselves. The Human Council then called for a galactic assembly. Every major species attended because they feared what humans had done. The hall was silent when humans entered, not because humans demanded silence, but because their presence carried weight. They were no longer seen as a young, emotional species. They were seen as a force of law. The human representative, a calm woman with silver hair, stepped forward. She did not shout, she did not threaten, she simply showed the Zarvak research footage, then the Eden 9 ruins, then the child rescue reports. Then she said, one sentence changed everything: do not harm human children. Many alien delegates protested and asked if humans had wiped out too much, if humans had gone too far. A delegate from a wealthy empire said the Zarvak could have been contained, not erased. The human representative looked straight at him and replied, "Containment is for accidents. This was a choice." Then she held up a small blue shoe, burned at the edges, the shoe that had fallen from the pod on Eden 9. She placed it on the table so everyone could see it, and she said, "We did not start this, we ended it." Then she delivered the rule that became galactic law. Later that day, the humans drew a line in space, and every species felt it like gravity. The rule was simple and clear. Any species that targets children as weapons will be treated as an extinction-level threat. No negotiations, no excuses, no mercy. The assembly did not vote against it because nobody dared, nobody wanted to be the next empire that tested the human heart. After the meeting, a secret document spread through the galaxy. It was written in plain language, so nobody could pretend they misunderstood it. Became known as the human line. It listed the prohibited crimes and the consequence. It ended with one final statement: humanity does not seek war. Humanity seeks safety. If you harm the innocent, we will remove you from the future. In the months that followed, human fleets returned to their borders, but they did not return to sleep. They built new rescue units faster than ever. They trained marine teams for hostage recovery. They created medical carriers for child survivors. They built alert systems that monitored distress patterns from colonies, and they shared those systems with neutral worlds too, because humans did not want more wars. Humans wanted to stop them before they began. On Eden 9, reconstruction started slowly. Workers cleared ash and rebuilt homes. Schools were rebuilt first, not because walls matter, but because childhood matters. A memorial was raised in the central square, shaped like a circle of hands protecting a small star. Every name of the lost was carved into stone so the colony would never forget. A sign stood at the entrance of the memorial with simple words: "We remember." We protect. Children who returned later played near that memorial and learned why it existed. They learned what happened, and they learned what humans did about it. Some grew up with fear, but many grew up with purpose, because pain can create weakness, or it can create guardians. In the end, the galaxy changed more than anyone expected. After the fall of the Zarvak Empire, no other power dared touch human children. Not because humans were the biggest species or the richest species, but because everyone had seen what humans become when that line is crossed. Humans become unstoppable. They become united. They become the storm that does not ask permission. They become the justice that does not bargain years. Later, a young alien officer in a distant empire asked his commander why all fleets avoided human worlds and why everyone treated humans with cautious respect. The old commander answered with a quiet voice, "Because humans love deeply, and love that deep becomes terrifying when you attack it." Then he looked at the stars and added, "Never forget the rule, never touch their children." Somewhere on a peaceful human world, a rescued child, now grown, stood under a night sky holding their own child in their arms. They pointed at the stars and said, "That is where humans came to bring me home." The child asked, "Were you scared?" The grown survivor smiled softly and answered, "Yes, I was scared, but humans came." Anyway, that is what humans do, and far out in space beyond old war ruins, the message still lived inside every database and every fearful memory. You hurt human children, say farewell to your entire species.